Button. And then I say a warm welcome to the first webinar of ONL 252. It's fantastic to have many of us with us today live, and some of you will might watch the recording afterwards. That is also nice. And an option. Today it's my honor to have Dave White with us again. For those of you who have missed the introduction on the homepage, who Dave is, he is the one behind the model visitors and residents, but he is also the Dean of Academic Strategy. I hope I got this right. Yes, at the University of the Arts in London, and still the president of the
Still,
Association of
yeah,
Learning Technology.
yeah.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah, that's right. That is right. That's still
And
correct. Yeah,
And last week, you were the keynote of the European Conference on Information Literacy, which took place in Bamberg.
that's
So,
right.
wow, fantastic to have you with us. Really looking forward to run your workshop with us again. And yeah, without further ado, I'll leave the floor over to you, Dave.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't know how many times we've run this session now. It's probably quite a few times, isn't it?
I think so.
Um, and one of the things that's interesting to me because of having done it over the years is what's stayed the same and what's shifted, over the years, which we can get into. But just to say, well, thanks for the invitation, and thanks for tuning in, if that isn't too like broadcast media 1980s concept, especially to people who are in, radically offset time zones. I do appreciate it. So the, we're not a massive group, but even if we were a massive group, I would encourage you to chat in the text chat as I'm going. If you've got any questions or any comments or any reflections, then drop them in text chat as we're going along. If it's something that you'd prefer to say on the mic because it's just easier to express, then we could do that as well. But I genuinely welcome that, and I keep the text chat open and keep an eye on it, and try and pay attention. So this can be as much as of a conversation as yeah, thanks. Yeah, as we need it to be. Um, Essentially, we've got a little bit less than an hour. Some of you might have seen the visitor resident stuff or might not have done. That's fine. But this is just a little flag to say in the middle of this session, we'll be doing an activity. So, but as I like to say, I will warn you when I get to the bit where I explain what the activity is. So I will literally say, this is the bit you actually need to pay attention to. Otherwise, you end up with that horrible workshop moment where somebody goes, okay, you get started, and you go, hang on a minute, I wasn't listening to any of that. And you have to turn to the person next to you, which is harder online, and go, wait, what are we supposed to be doing? It's like classic small group event. So yeah, I will wrangle my slides into position, which always takes me a little while in Zoom because um, we're very Teams, and there's something I don't know exactly. Let me try putting that into presentation mode. Oh gosh. The thing is, I've got a massive monitor here, so now my entire monitor is just that. So what I'm going to try and do is figure out how I can get the text chat up. Yeah, look at that. Okay. The thing that I find, I'm sure you've all found this as well, is that Teams and Zoom and various other bits of technology, they're just similar enough and just different enough that there's like if it was totally different, it might be easier to use somehow. But I'm like, why is that button there instead of there? But that's just habit, isn't it? Thanks, Susan. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, you've already tried to do a map. That's great. We're going to do that in the middle. That video's so old now. It's like my picture of Dorian Gray thing. So, there's a much younger man in that video that I can't relate to anymore. That's a different discussion. Um, all right, let's get started. But yeah, chat is welcome. So um, this is a quote that I really like for lots of different reasons. One is it's from 1997. And the other one is that it shows that occasionally a futurist actually says something that turns out to be true, but it is very rare. And Kevin Kelly is one of those people that said he's a bit like Arthur C. Clarke, he's one of those people that said a lot of things really early. And when he said them, everybody was like, I don't know what that's about. And then it sort of turned out to be true. So really, um, a lot of what's going on in the world and in education is because of this, is we've connected pretty almost everything and almost every person, clearly not everybody, but a lot of people together, right? And that has an enormous amount of different effects and impacts. And one of the important things is that this it's a network, right? So it's not a kind of top-down thing, which is huge. So you could argue that the fact that we can all publish in inverted commas online because it's a two-way street, not a one-way street, has a massive implications for what we mean by information, data, knowledge, education, what it means to learn. All of these things have sort of radically shifted over a relatively short period. I would say a spectacularly short period of time. Okay. So I'm gonna this is just a kind of an opening thought, and I'm going to come all the way back around to it at the end of the session. And one of the interesting things is how huge that is. This is also Kevin Kelly. He ran this thing called the Internet Mapping Project, which is exactly as it says here. Please draw a map of the internet as you see it and indicate your home. And the thing that I find fascinating is that we all use the internet all the time, and an increasing amount of our lives and our work take place in this place that we call the internet or the network or whatever we want to call it. And yet we don't really have a shared conception of it because it sort of doesn't really exist. It's kind of physical, it's not physical, but it's very, very conceptual. So what's interesting about the Internet Mapping Project is that everybody has a different answer to that question, right? So this one is a kind of cables and computers sort of answer. And this is the same for all of us. I mean, this is the same for any colleagues you work with or any students you work with, is we talk about online and we talk about all of these things a lot, but we don't really have a shared understanding of it. Here's another answer, the swirly one, the one that I relate to, with a little red square down in the bottom left-hand corner, which is presumably their home. But most of us would, I mean, if I'd asked you to do this exercise, most people will go, right, well, it's like this, isn't it? Here's another one. I don't know what that is. Some sort of information pipe, who could say? It's quite a nice sort of poetic process. And then the last one I'll show you is this one, which is where it's sort of a cloud of happy people. Now, I think this map comes from a few years ago because everybody's happy. I'm pretty sure if they drew it now, everybody would be sad. There'd be certainly a range of emotions. But this is a very happy person. There they are in the middle, labeled as me. And I guess my point is all of these are correct answers, right? So if we go back to this one, this is the sort of physical infrastructure technology view. And then the last one is it's just all people connected together. And we variously hold these different views. I'd say for a lot of people, the online environment is this. I'd say for a lot of incoming students, it's more this than anything else, right? So, thanks for posting those. Yeah. So it's a fun exercise, that, because it's so simple. So my point is, we're operating in and around an environment that we all conceptualize differently. And at one end of that continuum, it's just technology, which is probably historically what it was thought of. and at the other end, it's just a load of people connecting with each other, and the technology's kind of vanished out of the model because we've become so normalized the technology that actually when we think of our phone, we're actually thinking about people, right? And one of my favorite quotes that I can't attribute to anyone because it just went past at some point. Somebody mentioned it, is we're not addicted to phones, we're addicted to being social, right? So we're social animals, and I think that's quite a useful way of looking at it. So just to kind of tee up before we get into uh, the visitor and residence bit of this, it's useful to, I always think it's useful to sort of lay out your educational philosophy so that you know where I'm coming from. Now, it's my view that everybody has an educational philosophy, but not all of us not everybody would necessarily know they had an educational philosophy until you ask them about it. Sometimes what I find is you say, you ask people about, well, what do you think education is? And they go, well, I don't know what you're talking about. You're just learning knowledge, right? There's the banking model of education, if you see what I mean. Is one version, and then perhaps at the other end of that is where I am, which is that education is a process of becoming. It's about the individual becoming. It's about identity. Yes, I will talk about the red arrows. Okay, so I don't know how many people in the session today are educationalists or educational developers or have done any research in this area broadly, but essentially educationalists and researchers love triangle diagrams. And I think it all comes from Bloom's taxonomy, right? So absolutely addicted to triangles. I fall into that trap sometimes as well. So the red arrows are basically saying, yes, there is a sort of stack of things here, but at any given moment, you're sort of running around them, you're iterating up and down them at any given moment. And so in a way, this is both a circle and a triangle. They're trying to play it both ways, okay? And I think that's important because otherwise you end up with this sense that, well, I'm going to learn access and awareness, and then I'm going to get some skills, and then I'm going to develop them into practices, and then that will extend or change my identity, and I will become the person that I want to become. Like incoming students, we have students that they want to become fine artists, they want to become graphic designers, right? But actually, you're bouncing up and down these things all the time, okay? In any given day or week or what have you. I think what I find useful about this, I mean, it's the pyramid model of digital literacy development, but actually, I don't, like a lot of these sort of digital literacy or digital type theories, if you take the digital out of it works fine, right? This is quite generalist in a good way. And so I tend to talk about identity and practices a lot up at the top of the triangle, but what I want to say or acknowledge that's important is that you access and awareness and skills are fundamental to the whole thing. So this, to me, I think sometimes in education we get so used to this idea of levels that we think of lower levels as being less important. But these are all incredibly important. You can't do any of these without any of the others, right? What you could say is that for some people, their education never gets beyond skills. You could say that. I don't think that's true, actually. I don't think you can learn anything without having an effect on your identity. I'm going to spend quite a lot of time around identity and practices, but actually, it's all important. Okay. But it was a good, yeah, I've been, just on the inverted point, Susan, I wasn't the first person to do this, but I took Bloom's taxonomy and turned it upside down and then exploded the top of it off because I was like, actually, I think creativity should be at the top, but it should be upside down, and I think creativity goes on forever, right? There's a blog post that I wrote somewhere about that. So yes, quickly, and then I should move on because I could get stuck here. And and the older I get, the worse I get at getting stuck in bits of talks because I'm not very disciplined. Is that the problem with a triangle diagram is it makes you feel like the thing that you're aspiring to is quite tiny and quite finite, but identity just goes on and on and on and on, right? So beware the triangle diagram. Anyway, now you know where I'm coming from. Just a note on all the AI stuff, right? I'm going to allude to it, but this is not entirely about that. One of the reasons is because I think 70% of the discussion around AI is the same as the discussion we had about Wikipedia. And so a lot of it's not new and some of it is new. But this is part of what I was talking about at the European Conference for Information Literacy last week, and I was uh, clear-minded enough to record it on my phone and then sync that to the slides. So that bottom link there, the "What is even real" link, goes to a blog post with a recording of that talk if you're interested. So this is me sort of saying thanks for that. That's very helpful. If you want to know what I think about AI in a quasi-philosophical way, which I think is legitimate, then that talk is worth tuning into. So I'm not going to get into all the details, but here's where I'm at with this stuff is we talk about cognitive offloading into technology, sort of the point of a lot of technology, right? But I'm sort of talking about offloading your own personal agency into technology, right? So certainly for students at my university, they're often, I'd say students everywhere, often faced with this gambit or this decision where they're going to do a thing and they can decide to do it a super efficient way using something like AI, or they can do it the slower way, but it involves more effort, more thought, and more of their own personal agency. So personal agency is a bit of an arts idea, but it kind of works. Self-determination or will, if you like. And so my point here, which is relatively simple, is that I think a key literacy now, whether you want to call it information, digital, learning literacy, whichever, is the ability to say, I'm not going to use the technology, even though I could, because by not using the technology, I'm going to learn more because I'm going to be more active in various ways. Okay. So that's my very sort of high level, what's our response to AI? And actually, I'd say you need quite a lot of expertise to work out when not to use the technology, uh, to be able to identify why that might be a good thing. But having said that, a lot of our students, we're in discussion with our students. Our students' union came out with a really good report called Art or Algorithm, and I actually think our students are quite thoughtful about this, but they're also quite anxious about it because it's difficult to know how to respond. So that's that. We can cut back round to it. So some of you will have heard of the digital natives idea, digital natives and digital immigrants. And I'm going to lay this out very quickly because it sets the scene for visitor and residents. So this was Mark Prensky about a quarter of a century ago now, in about 2000, essentially said, if you grow up with digital technology around you, you're sort of native to it, and you kind of accidentally learn it because it's just part of your environment. It's sort of a metaphor of language when you look at it. So it's but if you're an adult when technology comes along, then you have to actively learn it in a different way. And it's a bit like you're not native to it. You're kind of immigrating into the technology. The nicest way to describe it is through language. So it's a bit like if you grow up with digital technology around you, then you're using that digital technology in the same way you might do your first language. And technologies that come along later, you might get really good at them, but it's always going to feel like an additional language or a second language. I don't think that's entirely helpful. The problem is that it became let me have a look at this. I'm gonna talk through this bit so we've got longer. Sometimes I ask the room their response to this question, but I've already answered it. So, I mean, we might have different answers. That's fine. But I think the point, I think ultimately, what it was a very attractive idea. It was a very early idea in terms of, at the point where the internet suddenly became sort of everywhere or almost everywhere. And ultimately, it became a sort of an essentialist generational narrative, which was, oh, the kids understand this and we're all dinosaurs. And there was something oddly comforting about that. And it became a dangerous excuse to not teach people how to use the internet or how to improve their sort of general digital or scholarly literacies. Um, and you can go back through history and say, oh, this has been going on forever. Like there's always a version for this in culture. Like I think you can go. Was it Socrates who basically said, oh, the kids are just going to write stuff down, so they're never going to remember anything. It was one of those guys. And then even in my lifetime, you had the teenagers have got a really short attention span because of MTV, or and so it goes on. Um, I had a good conversation with somebody recently where they said it's always the generation that's in the position of power being slightly down on the other generations around them. So it became essentialist and it became as kind of an excuse not to engage, or at least that was the risk, right? Um, I actually had, this is a few years ago, this is back in 2018, 2017, 18. Yeah. I ended up doing an onstage debate at Online Educa in Berlin with Mark Prensky about this. And I actually found it genuinely frustrating. Not so much because, I just spilled my coffee over it, not so much because of the digital natives and immigrants idea, but because Mark Prensky kind of characterized higher education in a particular way and then critiqued it. And the way that he characterized higher education wasn't a version of higher education I recognized. It was a very specific, very old-fashioned, very traditional version of higher education, which only exists in certain places. So he'd say, here's the problem with higher education. And I found it quite difficult to respond, as you can see from that picture, because I was like, but that isn't higher education, so it's not the problem with it. So we got there in the end, sort of. Um, all right. So that's all framing and all of the rest of it. What I'll do as I mop the bottom of my coffee is, has anybody got any questions or thoughts at that point? I'll just pause quickly at that point before I dig in any further. Okay. So as is always the way pedagogically, either everybody's happy or everybody's sad. If you're never quite sure, you're never quite sure. I'm going to go with happy. So what I'm going to do is run through this method of mapping. Well, I'm going to run through what the visitor and residence thing is, and then I'm going to run through how we do the mapping. Then we're all going to do our own maps. Yeah. Yeah. So so here we go. We just go around that roundabout again, right? So any article or paper that says the thing is the kids are all this, that, and the other, you have to treat very, very carefully. And years ago, I was at a library conference, and I started by saying the thing is about people in their 40s is that they all think this and they all do this, and everybody was really offended. And I went, that's the problem with generational thinking, right? Is it anyway? Yes, that's a very good example you posted there. So just to lay this out quickly, it's really simple. It's a kind of metaphor. And it's the point of it is to focus on, instead of age and instead of skill level, really in some senses, it focuses on motivation to engage. And I always find that useful. I find that useful now when I'm thinking about our students at our university. What is their motivation to engage? or if they're not engaging, why are they not motivated to engage, is a much better question than they have to do this thing. It's annoying that they're not doing this thing. If you ask, well, why are they not doing this thing? I know it sounds really simple, but it makes a difference, right? So this is about what is our motivation to engage in the digital environment in various ways. It's a continuum. We're not trying to type people to say, oh, you're a resident, you're a visitor. We're using this as a way of saying, well, what are the various practices and motivations when we engage with the digital environment? So as it says there, it's not about technical skill or age. So hopefully it's less essentialist, okay? The easiest way to explain it is to explain either end of the continuum, okay? Which sometimes, there's this, occasionally you hear like pop stars saying, every so often they go to sing one of their hits and they forget the lyrics, right? And they just draw a blank on their own, on the first line of their own massive hit that they. Sometimes when I try and explain this, I get that. I'm like, yeah, what is this about? Because I feel like it's completely innate. And then when I go to explain it, I'm like, actually, I need to concentrate here. So I'll get there. So at one end of the continuum, there's a visitor mode. And the easiest way to explain it is that you're thinking of the web, because it's effectively all about the web or the network. You're thinking about the web as a series of tools. So the sub metaphor I like to use is you're thinking about it like almost like an untidy toolbox. It's got all sorts of useful tools in it. You decide what you want to do. You rummage around in the toolbox, find the tool that's useful for you. It might be like online banking or trying to book a holiday or Amazon or something like that. You do the thing you want to do, and then you sort of step away from it, right? Uh, so it's instrumental. It doesn't leave a social trace. It will leave a whole load of data traces, but there's no social trace of you on the surface of the web for other people to see, right? So if you just go to Amazon, you buy something, you don't leave a social trace. If you go to Amazon and you leave a review, that's slightly more resident mode because you're leaving a trace, right? And there's some examples there. The resident mode at the other end of the continuum is, and I think again in the context of AI, I realized that this was quite important, is that you're conceptualizing the web, not necessarily explicitly, as a series of places. So it's not a set of tools, it's a set of places. And the reason it's a set of places is your motivation to go there is to connect with other people or to be visible to other people, right? So it's like a social construction of place thing. And what I realized was that the place has been the predominant metaphor of the digital environment for about a quarter of a century, certainly with social media coming along. And one of the things that was intriguing to me is that AI isn't a place. Everybody's separate when they're using AI, and I think that might be important, right? There isn't like a social use of AI collective something. It doesn't sort of work. And it's because, as I was saying at that conference, because the predominant metaphor of AI, which is a really dangerous one, is that it's a person. So that the metaphor is person, not place all of a sudden, right? Which I think can be a bit limiting. Anyway, when you're in resident mode, your motivation to engage online is to engage with others. You will leave a social trace. It might not be synchronous, it might be asynchronous. That happens a lot of the time. And there's some example of different activities. Now, it doesn't have to be social media. Some people are socially present in email. Some people are socially present in all sorts of technology. So it's not that things in mode are in sort of older versions of technology and things in resident mode are in new technology. It's not like that. You can co-opt various technologies to be in either visitor or resident mode depending on how you act. Like, so a lot of people are in visitor mode most of the time in social media because you're just reading stuff. And nobody knows you're there, if you like. I'd say one useful way of thinking about it is that really resident activity is extremely visible online. It's the kind of stuff that anybody can Google to, right? So even people you don't know could see that activity, right? That's extreme resident. because you're living out part of your life online. In the middle, there's a lot of what we're doing now where you're somewhat resident, but you're within a closed group or community. So you'll all be parts of, say, WhatsApp groups or perhaps course groups on a VLE, and you might be posting things that are attached to you and your identity. So it's resident, but you know where the edge is. Okay, I think that's quite important. So that's the continuum. What we did was we added another axis because context was really important. We realized that people's motivation to engage and their digital practices were different in a personal context to an institutional one. Some people use different labels here. When we do it with students, quite often they'll use the term course, not institutional, because that's kind of more meaningful for them. But context is really important in terms of how you engage and who you choose to engage with and in what way, obviously. So what I'm gonna do is quickly show you a couple of versions of my maps, and then I'm gonna ask you to do yours and post them to a Padlet, and I'll give you the link to the Padlet, okay? And then we'll have a chat about them. So this is mine from 10 years ago, or more than 10 years ago, 12 years ago. And what's interesting about it is how massively it's changed, okay? So I was all over Twitter. And if you wanted to find me, I'd probably be in Twitter, to the extent that people in my team would DM me in Twitter instead of emailing me because they knew they'd get a quicker response. I was more in Twitter than anywhere else, certainly online. Sometimes I was more in Twitter than I was in the room, right? I was one of those people for a while. I blog. It's always about work stuff. Comments are open. Yeah, exactly. But I'm not on Twitter anymore, right? I used to have Skype just on all the time, and people could just grab me and chat to me. So I was really quite resident. You know, the little green tick or whatever it was always on. And then the other end of the continuum here. So if you look in the quadrant, there's personal and visitor. Yeah, I think apps really enable resident state and increasingly hard to be a visitor. Yes, I agree. Um, yes to all of that for sure. And so I have a problem with the concept of real and real life and the idea of, to your point, whenever we're online, we're also still in a room, right? It's not a disembodied act. And this is a big deal when you're trying to do fully online creative education, which we're doing at the moment, right? And it's worth considering. We're always still in our bodies. And yes, the business model of the web, which is just advertising, pushes everybody to be more and more resident for lots of obvious reasons to do with the attention economy and all the rest of it. So when I started doing this, it was uncommon for people to be really resident, and now it's uncommon for them to not be really resident. So that's shifted over a decade or more. I mean, just on this one personal visitor quadrant, Facebook, I used to use just like I wasn't interested in I wasn't really interested in the social bit of it. It was just there as a terrible address book, right? And some other examples. And then I redid my map a couple of years ago, and I realized it's now completely out of date. So it's actually shifted quite a lot recently, partly because of the web becoming more toxic and partly because of my work becoming more resident. I think some of this is post-COVID hybrid working and stuff like that. So you can see sort of how it shifted. As I said, my work's got Teams, so I'm kind of present there. But my group now has Slack, so that's probably should be there. And I don't have any Twitter, and I do have LinkedIn. One of my greatest sadnesses is that LinkedIn is now one of my main bits of social media, and I never thought that was going to happen to me, but it's happened to me because LinkedIn is the least toxic of the sort of quasi-social spaces, professionally anyway. So within 2 years, that's all shifted round. So some people do maps over years to sort of track this because it becomes an interesting thing for reflective practice. Yeah, you are still in your body and your brain. or your data. Oh, well, I mean, that's a dangerous word, isn't it? You don't know you haven't been uploaded, but I'm not going to get into that. But yeah, absolutely. Without getting into the detail of it, you have to blame Descartes because the whole mind-body duality thing gets transported into the online, anyway, Western Western civilization is very quick to deny that the body exists because we find it inconvenient and a bit icky. So when something like the digital environment comes along, we're like, yeah, yeah, forget about that. But it's always there and it's a big deal. Just more specifically on that, I've had some great conversations with people about that camera off, camera on thing for students. And some students, this is what a colleague was saying, actually quite like having their camera off because it means they're not encountered as what they look like, and they can wind their way into a course without a whole load of cultural assumptions being made. So, it's what I would say is, and this was my feeling after COVID, is the digital environment was very empowering for students because it gave them more control about how they engaged and how they chose to not engage and gave them more choices. And actually, I think the fact that they had more choices upset quite a lot of teaching staff. Uh, uh, yeah, LinkedIn. Yeah, I had this horrible, and then we will get onto the mapping. I had this horrible feeling the other day that because of the way that social media and algorithms operate, the longer you are in an environment for, the more toxic it becomes because the algorithm gradually kind of wraps itself tighter and tighter around you with negative things for attention. So certainly my LinkedIn has got progressively more toxic. And that could just be because I've spent more time there. That would be sad, wouldn't it? But it's possible. Anyway, a couple of examples of my maps. So what I'm going to do now is ask you to grab a bit of paper and a pen or colored pens, or you can do this digitally. Draw the axis and start making your own map. And what we will do is we'll do that for sort of 5 or 6 minutes. So just scroll it down. Don't think too hard about it. It should be a bit messy. When I do this in a physical room, I draw these maps on a flip chart pad to demonstrate that the digital version of my maps make them look much better thought through than they are, right? And then in a few minutes, I'll ask you to upload them to a Padlet and we'll have a look. So I will be here and we'll pay attention to the text chat, or if you want to jump on a microphone, if anybody's got any questions about that process. But broadly, just crack on, as I discovered in Bamberg is a very British phrase. Crack on, draw a map, and post it. It's not a super scientific process. So when you are ready, you can use that link or the link that, well, the link that you always put in the text chat, or you can QR code your way to the Padlet and post an image of your map. This is the part where I feel like we need some music or something.
Yes. Maybe we should.
Uh, yeah, I mean, the virtual can make you feel disembodied. That's for sure. But I don't know, sitting in a lecture can make you feel disembodied as well.
Yeah. I don't know if you can hear me.
I can.
No.
Hello.
Yeah. I took my my niece to the zoo
Right.
and she got all excited about my camera on my phone, and I thought she was going to take pictures of the animals, but she
Right.
didn't. She took pictures of herself
Yeah.
and worked all the little fun things on the camera. And I said, "There's an elephant," and she said, "No, no, it's all right.
Well,
I've
so
got him."
so I had a moment a long time ago when I was at a conference it was in Berlin again, where I thought my kids were quite young, and I thought, oh, I'll take a picture of the Brandenburg Gate so that I could talk to them about where I've been when I got back. And I suddenly realized there were about 1,000 much better pictures of the Brandenburg Gate on the internet already, and I might as well show them those and say that's where I was. And then I suddenly realized why the selfie was born, because it's not about the thing, it's about proving you were stood next to the thing. Do you know what I mean? So because actually there's already a photo of everything online. I found it quite disappointing actually. Like it was a bit of I felt a bit sad. I was like, yeah, I'm here, yeah. And then and then I realized we could just use Google Earth and wander around. So it became, yeah.
It's depressing, isn't it? I took all these pictures on a recent holiday, and I was showing them to a friend of mine and saying, "Which one do you think I should print out and put on the wall?" And she said exactly the same thing. She said, "Oh, there's far better pictures of fountains and things online." And I said, "But I didn't go to those ones." And she said, "No, no, 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 but they're really good pictures."
Yeah, yeah. There's something complex going on. So as in a very broad way, I think a lot of what's been happening in the last 10 or 15 years is a response to complexity and an overabundance of information. So when there's a picture of everything online, what does it mean to be you? And our reaction to it tends to be like hyper individualist. We sort of feel like we have to put more effort into proving that we're a valid individual because there's so much information everywhere. So I can kind of see how, I mean, it does give rise to populism and all that kind of stuff as well. So it's pretty risky, but I kind of get it. Where I kind of get the impulse, but whether it makes the world a better place. Right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to. I vowed I'd never become one of those academics like when I was a kid at school that didn't know how to use the projector. But I feel like I'm slowly beginning to become that person. I'm going to go to the Padlet and share the Padlet. So if you've got anywhere with your map, and you think, that's a good like version 0.5, then do go to the Padlet and upload it. I've got so many Padlets open all of a sudden. I need to actually follow the link. There we go. Oh, there's a map there already. Okay. So I'm going to do that sort of Zoom inception thing whereby, because you've probably got the Padlet open on a tab, but I'm also going to share it into Zoom so that we sort of know where we are. Okay.
My axes have disappeared. Sorry, but you get
That
the
you,
general
'cause you did your
Yeah.
homework before the session, didn't you? Which is why that's already there.
Which is why it was so fast. Yeah, yes, I didn't do it just a minute ago because I'm hopeless at doing things spontaneously, and I imagine it would be a mess.
Well, mess is all right. I'm all for mess.
Oh,
Error 1016. What's
Never
that?
heard
Oh.
about that one.
That's exciting.
wow.
Generally speaking, you just sort of you can click on the little plus down at the bottom right-hand side, or just sort of click. Yeah,
Try again.
that's it. Yeah, try
Anyone
again.
else having that problem?
Hmm.
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 Could you maybe go back to
Maybe load it again.
Do you want to
Try
the
turning it on
QR
and off
code?
again.
Yeah, I'll go. I'll reshare the QR code, and we'll try
Thank
going
you.
around that loop again. Yeah, we'll give it one more go. There's the QR code. All right, brilliant. I will. I'll take that off screen and go back to the Padlet. Because my screen has become completely almost completely unreadable. There it is. Okay.
Now there's stuff happening in the Padlet, at least some
Is there?
icons are getting in.
I'm only seeing one map.
I think everyone's working on it.
Yeah,
We'll get some more, yeah.
I've done what I
As long
normally
as-
do with this session and spent too long chatting. There's another map. All right, brilliant.
Are you able to rotate mine?
No, that's one of
No,
the exciting things,
sorry.
but that's all right. We can
Okay.
we can make it. In fact, what I'm going to do, just because now I know that your microphone must work, is I'm going to I'm going to have a look at your map and we'll have a quick chat about it. So
Okay, thanks.
so what I find is everybody's map is different, but everybody can kind of account for their map. So hi, do you want to just tell us a bit about your map?
Yeah, so my sort of resident side of things tends to mostly be work-related stuff.
Yeah.
And the visitor stuff is partly work and partly personal stuff where I don't know if I'm intentionally trying not to leave much of a trace, but it just sort of happens that way.
Yeah.
So,
You're
and
being
AI
quite
is
organized
still a
about.
question.
Yeah, I mean, it is really interesting to me that if you go back to like 2011, 2012, residency was almost all personal because the workplace hadn't worked any of that stuff out. And now I think quite often it's the other way around, is that quite a lot of people are resident because the culture and the method of work, demands it in a way. But that's within relatively controlled bounds, isn't it? So, yeah, that makes sense. And you've got a bit of an AI down there, but it's super visitory because it's difficult to know how it could not be. But I'm
Yeah.
sure somebody will come up with the resident AI something or other. That'd be a nightmare. All right, thank you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go and find another map. This is random, by the way. I have no real reason for. I don't know what. I'm going to go for this one. If you don't want to speak to your map, that's fine. But if you do, whose is this? And did you want to say anything about it?
That's mine.
Okay. And I see you got a canvas there. So is that for a similar sort of reason? Is that's very work related?
Yes, we use Canvas for work stuff. So
Yeah.
that's why it's a institutional resident because
Yeah.
you're visible there, who you are and what you're doing. So yeah.
Yeah. And then you've got a whole load of stuff that's just in the middle. Now, for me, I've got a lot of stuff that's in the middle because essentially it's just this big mess of stuff that some of it's to do with work and some of it's to do with family and some of it's to do with friends. Is it that sort of thing going on in the middle there?
It is that sort of thing. I use like Zoom, for example, for personal reasons and also for work.
Yeah.
But it's the kind of thing that you like now and then you're on Zoom. It's not so you're not fully resident as such, but not also visitor per se. So you're kind of in the
Yeah.
middle. Same with OneDrive. It says needed.
Yeah.
And Google Docs and so on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
And you've done well to remember streaming. A lot of people forget that they're using the internet when they're watching television in inverted commas.
Yeah.
So that's in terms of, I mean, obviously the squares on mine were just like the territory it covered. It's not indicative of how good I am at something, whether I enjoy something or how much time I spend doing something. I mean, in terms of time, streaming is probably the single biggest sort of time that a lot of us would spend online. We just don't tend to think of it in those terms, but nevertheless it is. I'll do one more, and because you did your homework up front, I will do this one. You can kind of see where the axis must be.
Must be, yeah.
So you've
So,
got a lot, again, you've got a lot going on in institutional resident. I don't know, how are you being resident in data repositories?
I've got my own data repository. My data's in repositories, and I'm desperately trying to keep them under control. I don't know what yours are like, but ours are very unstable. So I get messages every week saying, we've had to change it. Can you please go in and check your data's still there and it hasn't been corrupted? So it's a bit of a topic for me.
And you've got WordPress there, which is are you using that like just a sort of web?
I use it for sort of bloggy things and for posting things. But I must admit, being involved in this, I've done a little bit of that more than I had before. But I didn't think of the streaming, and I do a lot of streaming of videos and music for lots of reasons. So that would fill out my visitor space very comfortably.
Yeah, I think the thing is I think the thing about a lot of visitor related practices is that we're so normalized to them we forget. And so like you've remembered to put Google Wikipedia there. A lot of people won't put Googling for things because it's just in the air, right? So okay, that's brilliant. I'm going to move on for time because I'm getting worse and worse at timing things. I will just bring the slides up and then but thank you for that. It's always, hopefully you find that useful. I think what I would say about it is it's a really useful exercise because it's nice to see other people's maps and hear them talking through their practices and where they're similar or different from yours, right? So if you do the mapping exercise, I always say the conversation about the maps is more important than the maps, right? If you've got, I don't know, a work team or a cohort of students and you do the mapping and then you talk it through, the extent to which you suddenly understand people's motivations for doing certain things in certain ways. And you also realize you can't just say, let's all use WhatsApp, because actually everybody's using it slightly differently. And that's definitely the case when you get into things like Instagram. You're like, we're going to do Instagram. Well, it doesn't really mean anything because there are so many different potential motivations and uses of those kind of platforms, right? So it can be quite a good way of getting to know people, but also negotiating collaborative practices. This is quite a good way of sort of a vehicle for that. So we had a discussion. I'm not going to talk about this for more than a couple of seconds, but essentially, a lot of what's going on now is networked. A lot of our institutions work in a hierarchical way. Often I find where there are points of tension, it's where a networked approach and a hierarchical approach kind of clashing with each other. Now, my view is you need a bit of both, right? But sometimes it's quite a good way of reading if people are like getting tense or anxious. Quite often it's because you're asking them to do something in a network way, but their view of it is hierarchical or vice versa. And as we've seen over recent years, often a networked approach will completely destroy a hierarchical approach, which is not necessarily a good thing. So, if we think about how Trump can use Truth Social and doesn't have to engage with classic journalism, there are pros and cons to that, but it's a classic example of the network kind of eating the hierarchy. And in theoretical terms, you could say it's the difference between constructivism and connectivism, but I'm sure you'll go on to discuss these kind of things in the rest of the course. This is a quote I got out somebody's blog on ONL a little while ago, and this is a sort of Dave Cormier idea if you come across his work, which is basically the structure of the course is also the content of the course. Now, I'm a bit of a fan of not getting obsessed with the idea of content. And thinking more broadly in terms of actually maybe the point of the course is to create a network of thinking rather than to consume content, right? But that is a very progressive idea that the digital environment allows you to do. It becomes quite, it's quite difficult to assess that kind of stuff, which is why it can be hard for higher education to adapt to it. I'm just going to show you some other people's maps that I've got over the years, just to give you a sense of it. This is the most minimal map I ever got. This is from a while ago. PhD student said, I think social media is evil and just trying to steal my data and sell me things. So this is what my map looks like. Now, my point here is this person could be a brilliant PhD student, right? So, you know, the density of your map and how good you are at things is not necessarily connected. I'll just go through a few more. This is where, without asking, somebody put a sad face next to SharePoint. And I suddenly realized, oh, actually, another thing you could do with your maps is add a layer of annotation to indicate, you know, what you enjoy, what makes you anxious, etc., etc., is quite useful. This person has got two roles, so they've got like a kind of, I think they ran a club and a society, but they also had a day job, so they did it in different colors as a way of saying, actually, I'm multiple people. This person was like 7 people. That one was crazy. So very, very quickly, just in the last 3 minutes, what can you do with this? Well, I've already described what's useful to do in terms of sort of making visible people's engagement online and how that can lead to creating a bit more of a shared understanding. I did a bit of research a little while ago where we got about almost 400 maps from students and staff, and then did a whole load of different work on them. The reason I want to show you this diagram is because of this one down here in the bottom left is age. And basically, people who had maps that had stuff in all 4 quadrants, when you normalize the data, that did not shift depending on what age you were, right? So people of all ages had full maps, as well as lots of other things going on. So it was my kind of, I published this in a paper in First Monday. It was essentially a kind of, no, this isn't age related, and I have some actual data on it. And then you get other forms of annotation. I quite like the arrows thing. So like, what direction is that particular practice or technology going in? Are you becoming more or less resident? And then just gradually more and more creative responses. And then this one's a combat. I quite like this one. It's got a bit of annotation and it's got arrows. So it's sort of saying, well, I do something here and then it flows into here and then it goes over here. So, you know, historically, I would have tweeted an idea and then had discussion and then written a blog post and then done a conference presentation and posted that to YouTube. Do you know what I mean? So there are these kind of practice flows that you can articulate using the maps. Some people put tracing paper on the top and start writing all of this on top of it to give a kind of like meaning layer, if you like. And then this is another one of my favorites. So this is aspirational. So in that pink area is what they aren't, but what they aspire to be. Ideal self, not real, would like to be. And this person was a PhD student who wanted to be like a really digital public scholar and wanted to be really active in this space. So I just wanted to show you that whole range of interpretations because it's very much offered as a method that can be, you know, used and adapted and extended, if you like. So just to finish up, I'm actually on time. This is from George Siemens, who's one of the sort of original connectivist kind of guys. And this is probably my favorite sort of digital education quote. Now that knowledge and networks are abundant, not scarce, the emphasis should be on connections. We, teachers, are the arbiters of connections. So if you think about how that might relate to the idea of content. So essentially, it's there's so much information is available and instantly available that actually being literate is about understanding how to connect these things together in a meaningful way, rather than just how to consume any given clump of information. And I like the idea of a teacher being the arbiter of those connections rather than being the kind of gatekeeper of knowledge. Now, that I'm sure nobody in this room thinks of themselves as a gatekeeper of knowledge, but our institutions still somewhat operate on that basis. So, you know, this is still what I'd say is we teachers are the arbiter of connections is still quite a radical idea, even sort of 25 years after the internet became incredibly widespread. Interesting, right? Okay.
Thanks a million, Dave.
Okay.
Always a pleasure. Yeah, fantastic to have you with us again and see you around hopefully
Yeah.
soon.
Yeah.
And everyone else, so I hope to see you next week at the workshop on the individual reflection spaces. You want to get your brush up your skills on WordPress and what the difference between pages and posts are, and what categories are, and what to use them for. So hope to see you around. Thank you all.
Cheers, everyone.
Bye.